Welcome to Talking Europe. Europe's leaders are hailing it as a man-on-the-moon moment, a mission to make Europe the world's first carbon-neutral continent by 2050. Now, along the way, the EU's Green Deal aims to cut the bloc's greenhouse gas emissions by more than half by the end of the decade. Now, politicians boast of bold targets, but climate activists question their real commitment. Now, my guest today, Esther Azin, is among those voicing some concerns. She's director of the World Wildlife Federation's European Policy Office. She's also the current chair of Green 10. That's a group of leading environmental NGOs focused on the EU. Now, in a recent open letter to the European Commission's president on behalf of the Green 10, Azin noted that the man who's in line to possibly become Europe's next climate commissioner, former Dutch Deputy Prime Minister Wopke Hookstra, once worked for a big oil company, and he's also been friendly as a politician to fossil fuel interests. Welcome to the show, Esther Azin. I'm going to cut to the chase. I was just looking a few minutes ago at the European Commission's climate website. There's 9,590 days to go until Europe says it's going to reach climate neutrality. That's January 1st, 2050. You would like to see that happen much earlier, 10 years earlier, 2040. How's that possible right now in Europe when we're seeing a lot of voters turning away from green policies, embracing right-wing policies, anti-EU sentiment, populism?
Well, thanks a lot also for taking the time to talk to us. You refer to the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is not perfect, but yet it's been a compass to put forward some important policy initiatives, especially on climate. You mentioned the 2050 target to achieve climate neutrality in the climate law, but also energy policy or the EU deforestation law. But we believe that now, after the summer that we had, but the many summers that we are likely to get, is not the time to pause or to slow down. On the contrary, we need to continue on the path of reforms to ensure that we get to this transition, which is also fair to all Europeans. And that was one of the objectives of the letter that we published and we sent to President von der Leyen.
Yeah, and I want to get to that letter in a second, but just going back to what you just said, I understand, you're right. Europe is seeing record heat waves, it's seeing droughts, it's seeing floods, it's seeing wildfires at a rate we haven't seen before, more frequent, more intense. But how do you get there when we see this backlash, rising people turning away from green policies rather than embracing them? How do you, as an activist, try to change people's minds?
There are several things that we need to do. The first, as you said, is raise this climate ambition and aim to achieve climate neutrality by 2040. And it's not only us, it's the EU scientific advisory body that is telling to the Commission that they need to go to a reduction of 90, even 95% of emissions by 2040. The second thing we need to do is to massively deploy renewable energies. Why? Because that's going also to help to make our energy bills cheaper. And that will get us out of the dependency on the fossil fuels that is causing some of the multiple crises that many people are living today. The cost of living, people are struggling to pay the energy bills as well. So that's the second thing that we need to do and that we are telling. And then we need to ensure that there is public funding available to support this transition, to support social policies, environmental policies, climate policies, but also to ensure that the private flows, the money that the banks are investing, is also aligned to get us to this transition. And last but not least, we have to make pay the big polluters.
I want to now cut to another chase, and that is the question of who's going to be Europe's next climate commissioner. And this is a person who, whoever it becomes, will lead Europe's negotiations at the upcoming COP28 climate summit in Dubai in November. Now, the man who has been picked by the Netherlands, who has the slot for that commissioner, is he's Wopke Hookstra. And he is the former foreign minister and deputy prime minister of the Netherlands. He's facing a tough grilling by members of the European Parliament. Now, you recently wrote an open letter on behalf of your Green 10 activists in which you voice concerns about him. I want to show our viewers the letter and exactly what you said. You said that, quote, "We are highly skeptical that Wopke Hookstra possesses the required credentials and expertise to lead on this critical portfolio, which includes a number of upcoming critical processes." Esther Azin, What are your concerns? Because I know you are not the only one who has expressed concerns with this candidate.
We are concerned, as is very clearly expressed in the letter, about his actual credentials. His work for Shell, a very well-known oil and gas company. The Dutch government granted, and he was already part of the government, a post-COVID recovery funding to the airline KLM, and there were no environmental conditionalities attached to that. But he, as a leader of the CDA party, also was instrumental in making the Dutch government fall, because they refused also to follow on the nitrogen policy, which caused the dismantle of the government. We don't believe that he has the necessary experience in climate diplomacy to be able, as you said, to lead the EU participation in one of the most critical COPs that is coming, which is the COP28. Now, and we know that our calls are supported also by many organizations, and the calls also have been picked up, at least by the members of the European Parliament, in the written questions that they've been addressed to Mr. Hookstra ahead of his hearing next week.
And I just want to note that I said you're not the only one voicing concerns over his candidacy. We also have a leading Greens member of Parliament, an actual deputy in the Parliament, who also issued a statement this week saying we have serious, maybe we could also show that, we have serious reservations about Hookstra. He has been a climate bystander, not a climate leader. We can't afford to have a weak link in this position. Those are strong words as well. Now, let me just play devil's advocate. He worked with Shell, big oil company, but it was many years ago, before he went into politics in 2006. Can a man who had a past in big oil, fossil fuels industry, might he not have reformed? Might he now have a new approach towards climate?
If he ever gets appointed, he ever gets the green light by the members of the European Parliament, we will judge him on his actions, not just on his statements, but on his actions. And these actions should include very clearly, as I said before, to get published the 2040 emissions reduction target at the earliest in 24, the Q1 of 24, and then leading, of course, the EU participation in the COP28. We should include making also a deal with southern countries to end up the fossil fuels era. These two critical issues, plus some of the files that still need to go through co-decision in the European Parliament, we will really judge them on his actions and not just only on his statements.
Now you addressed this letter to the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She is a Conservative Party member, but have you gotten any sort of response? Have you gotten any sort of feedback from anyone in the political establishment that they hear your concerns and that, don't worry, he's not a sure thing, there could be another candidate for this post?
We haven't had a formal response, but President von der Leyen, as I said before, we had a series of meetings with leading members of the European Parliament, and we've seen most of our concerns, especially about the substance and what should be the priorities, whoever holds the portfolio, reflected in the written questions addressed to Mr. Hookstra. As I said, whether he makes it or not in the end, that of course is also politics, but whoever holds the portfolio, what is also important is that he or she delivers on the substance.
I want to get back to the point I was making earlier. Regardless of who the next climate commissioner is, it's the political climate in Europe, a backlash against the green climate transition, many voters embracing more right-wing, more populist, more anti-EU parties. We saw a recent EU bill to protect nature and biodiversity getting a lot of opposition, especially from farmers in the EU. They feared these measures would hurt their economic livelihoods. Are you seeing those arguments a lot, people saying these things to you? And what do you say to those people? How do you fight back against those arguments, those fears?
Indeed, we are observing this pushback, very worryingly, coming from the political family of Ursula von der Leyen, as you said, the European conservatives. And they are using arguments that new regulations will harm the competitiveness of European industry, or, as you said, in the case of the nature restoration law, that they are going to create problems of food accessibility in Europe, which is totally unfounded, or that if we restore natural ecosystems, it's going to destroy people's livelihoods. We are going to, tear down villages. That's not really true. It's unscientific. On the contrary, we know that by restoring key natural ecosystems, we are going to keep CO2, here and not in the atmosphere. And that includes forest restoration, the restoration of peatlands, of wetlands. And we also know that healthy natural ecosystems are also key to produce food, to produce healthy food. If your soil is poor, there's nothing that is going to grow on your soil. So actually, nature restoration measures work well for climate, but also for food production. And this is what we've been countering together with many other NGOs, but also with thousands of citizens that are supporting us in these calls.
I want to ask you finally, this wouldn't be complete if I didn't ask you about the money factor. The EU's Green Deal calls for 55 billion euros to be devoted to the climate transition. It's a lot of money. Is it enough? How much do you think really needs to be put towards this? Do you see the financial commitment there?
We see the financial commitment, but we haven't seen it yet in the current budget. And that's why the next budget and the next commission is going to be so important, because what we need is to really step up, as you said, public funding, not just for climate and environmental actions, but also for social policies. And what we need to do as well is to ensure that the private flows support this transition. We need to give predictability to investors on where are the areas and the sectors they need to invest to continue advancing on the transition. So that's why we still need to advance on developing some of these policies that they are going to guide both the public investment and the private ones.
Esther Azin, you're European Policy Director of the World Wildlife Federation, and you're also a leading campaigner in the Green 10 Coalition of environmental NGOs. I really thank you for sharing your thoughts on where Europe stands right now at a very critical moment in its green transition at a time of rising anti-EU sentiment and rising populism. Thanks for being here, and thanks to you. And thanks to all of our viewers. We will be back shortly with more Talking Europe.